Welcome to this roundtable discussion about the Student Forum of UACES, and with me I've got a great group of people who are going to introduce themselves in a minute. My name's Simon Usherwood. I'm Treasurer of UACES, and I was the second ever Chair of the Student Forum way back in the very early 2000s. Do you want to say?
Okay, so I'm Viviane Ravet. I'm at the Queen's University Belfast, and I was Chair of the Student Forum from 2014 to 2016.
Okay.
Well, I'm Miguel Otero Iglesias, and I'm a Senior Analyst at the Elcano Royal Institute in Madrid and Adjunct Professor at IE University, as well in Madrid. And I was a Chair of the Student Forum from 2011 to 2013.
I'm Anna Wambach, based in Newcastle, and I've been involved in the Student Forum since 2014, and I've been the chair since last November.
And I'm Liz Monaghan, and I'm a lecturer in politics at the University of Hull, and I was involved in the Student Forum way back around 2004 as a member of the committee, and then as chair for 2 years after that.
Okay. So between us we've got, well, lots of experience of the forum. We're going to talk about some different things. We're going to talk first a little bit about why we set up the forum, how we've seen it changed, and then I think talking more about being a PhD student in European Studies and how the forum's played a role in that. As the old hand, which is always a wonderful position to have on these kind of discussions, it's maybe worth saying just a few things. So I was the second chair of the association, and I was involved at the point of setting it up in about 2000 because we found that there were a lot of graduate students coming to the conference, being involved in the association, but there wasn't really a place for us to get to know each other. And we thought that there was a good group of people who seemed keen in putting something together, a lot of support from the officers and the committee to try and develop that further and structure it a bit more. And really it was about recognising that graduate students have always been a really important part of what UACES does. And just to give an example, I was doing my PhD at LSE, and I never met people at LSE doing PhDs on similar topics. I had to go to UACES conferences where I would meet people who had an office down the corridor from me, but who never bothered to walk down the corridor, and nor did I for that matter. So recognising that, this was a great way of building capacity. And I think particularly that European studies often is quite atomised, we're spread out, that this was a way of creating a common space for people. So working with the committee, working with Charlie Burns, who was the first chair, we started to kind of set up some activities. So we was trying to think about what's useful. So partly about providing contact lists, so we were setting up the Euro Research mailing list, but also having some regional research conferences, so giving students, grad students, an opportunity to present their work in a more friendly space. Well, I mean, it's already a very friendly space here at UACES, but an even more kind of benign environment, giving them experience to do that. So one of the first things that we were doing was organising regional conferences. I think we had a North conference and a South conference, and I think my earliest memory was an event at Essex, bringing together panels, a whole range of subjects. I think we had a really good turnout, and again, meeting some new people who hadn't previously been involved. And I think that was one of the real things, was that by having a student forum, making it a more explicit welcome for PhD students, which I think was a really useful kind of development. I'm not going to go on about the past too much, but I'm interested in kind of getting your views about how you see the forum developing, changing, the big changes. One of the things that we've talked about is, or might talk about, is the way that we've gone from having annual chairs to having two-year chairs, and quite how that came about. So it's probably a good reason to to pass to you.
Yeah, well, I was on the Student Forum committee for a year, or was it 2? And then became chair when the previous chair vacated. I think the election was uncontested, so it's more like a coronation, really. And it was initially for a year's term, but there was no stampede of others to take over, so I stayed for another year. And in actual fact, the kind of continuity over 2 years worked quite well, and I think since then there's been a 2-year mandate for chairs, but I'm not sure about committee members as well.
As well?
Yeah.
As well, yes.
One of the things we also decided to do, it worked okay, was to try and separate out some functional roles for committee members, so there'd be someone who's looking after the conference, someone who's looking after Euro research, mailing list, and so on, and someone looking after or in charge of overseeing JCER, as we called it in those days, which of course is JCER nowadays. And that was an innovation that started when I was on the committee. So we had a kind of co-chair of the committee, Lars Hoffman, who was doing his DPhil at St Anthony's, Oxford. And whilst I was chairing the student forum, he was the editor, the first editor, the founding editor of the journal. So it made a lot of sense to try and split our work up in that respect. So it was becoming quite differentiated already at that stage.
And I think that's one of the things is that the portfolio of activities is developed. You know, we've kind of gone through different formulations of the committee and roles, and from this side of the table, things that you introduced or that you brought about or that you saw happening, changing.
I mean, when I was the chair, actually, the student forum committee was not really involved in JCER. And so, the editors back then, they were really kind of, doing it themselves. And so we had to push a bit, and there was a change of editors, and that helped us, back to co-edit or at least, find reviewers. And I think, overall the student forum, I mean, especially if you were one of the committee members, gave you a lot of opportunities to acquire skills, right? I mean, that's really, from going to the conferences to have just like, peers that are at your level, and so you are not as nervous, and it's not as kind of, daunting to be in a proper conference. So it was a mock training for that, but as well for the committee members, it was just amazing to, to see how you have to select places to do conferences, to organize a conference, to do the editing of the JCR, etc. So I think, it was a wonderful experience on my side, and I think everyone really loved it. And then, and so, we really strengthened the feeling of, the student forum committee should be much more involved in JCR.
I think from my own experience, I completely agree in terms of skills training, but we tried to make sure that if you had helped select the paper 1 year, perhaps then you were taking a lead on that and bringing new people in, showing them the ropes, but also letting them learn on the job, and then doing slightly different tasks year on year, so that you could contribute to all the different elements of the committee. And I guess the big change was also the rise of social media, the rise of the blog that we started. So, is this kind of beyond JCER, trying to decide what the student forum should be doing on Twitter, should be doing on Facebook, and I'm sure, it would change again. And we've been developing this.
Yeah, we've been trying to become much more active on social media in the past year, also with a lot of help from the UACES office, I have to say, just trying to get our events promoted and just have it out there, because I think we were a bit quiet in the past years. Only when we did have events going on, then we would tweet and then we would publish things, but now we really try in the run-up to the events and throughout the year to stay active. And we had the Ask the Publisher panel here as well on Monday, and that was another way of getting the student forum out there and having another way to promote the student forum, because unfortunately we really struggled attracting people to come to the last conference, which is a shame, because as we said, it's such a great opportunity to present your papers in a safer environment and a friendly environment with a really good roundtable at the beginning and at the end. So we really tried and push it very hard on social media.
Yeah, but I think thinking about getting people involved, whether as participants or as committee members or as chairs, is a persistent kind of theme, and we've tried different things over time. And I know that those regional conferences we used to do, we had 3 years, 4 years where they worked really well and we got really good recruitment, and then suddenly it dried up and we went down to one regional conference, and then we went into kind of the more kind of annual kind of general conference. And I think that's one of the things that for me has always been quite striking about the Student Forum, is the way that it's been able to adapt to changing situations and finding new and interesting kind of activities. I think JCER is a classic example of that it's an initiative that has taken on a life of its own. Maybe at some point it's a bit too much of a life of its own, but then has come back and still has that really kind of deep organic link with the work of the Student Forum. And then just changing spaces. And maybe that's a useful question to you. When I was doing my PhD back in I started in 1999, and I finished in 2003, that lots has changed that I can see, and that the way being a PhD student has changed, I think also as reflected in the way that being the work of the Student Forum has changed as well. It's probably easier for me to reflect on that, but are there things that you particularly notice, changes that you've seen that have had that impact? How much is the forum driving change? How much is it reflecting change?
So my first experience at the Student Forum was a seminar. There's a seminar in November in London, learning about publishing, blogging, all of that, and realizing, I'm a year in my PhD, I don't have any publication in pipeline. It's a problem. I need to get going. And the whole, needing to publish a lot even during the PhD in order to have any kind of shot on the job market might, I think, perhaps be one of these changes in which the Student Forum has really been there as well to help students navigate that new change.
I mean, that's the reason that JCER originated in the first place, because it was becoming apparent that doctoral students needing to publish was increasingly a thing, and there was a sense that whilst one would aspire towards kind of established journals, it was much more likely that if there was something aimed more at PhD students and early career research and kind of cutting edge, ongoing, developing research, then that would sort of fill that gap. So that was really a response to a kind of emerging trend that was occurring.
I think we also use the knowledge of how the PhD has changed to attract students to the Student Forum. We say, look, you've got those pressures in a PhD, and we help you develop your skills in that area. We've got those panels on publishing, we've got those panels on teaching, we've got training on all sorts of things. For the next seminar, we were thinking about training on what to do at the conference, just for people to learn how to present themselves at the conference and
how to network, right?
Yeah, as well.
That's important.
To take or not to take pictures of conference food. I mean,
for example, well, I don't know whether I should be attending or presenting, but again, I think that's part of it. One of the things we were talking about just before we started filming was Vivian, you asking me if I had done a PhD, because you seem to have this memory of an apocryphal time where people could get jobs in universities without PhDs, and certainly when I was studying, I think I was at the very tail end of that. I did know some people who had got jobs without PhDs. They'd had some professional experience, or they had apparently just turned up and the university had employed them. I found that unusual. But certainly at the point that I was graduating, finishing the PhD, you needed a PhD to stand a chance. And articles was coming through, but it was very rare. And I think one of the things I notice now, not least when we're advertising for jobs, is that the requirements for entry into the job market, certainly for a permanent position, have become so much more demanding, that the quality of applicants that we have is so much higher. And again, partly that's about the professionalisation of PhDs, which I think is a really important part and really reflects on the work of the Student Forum. But again, if we're looking at an entry-level job, if you don't have a PhD, if you don't have some publications, if you haven't got some funding, if you haven't done some teaching, it's possible just to scrape those people out and say, well, we've got dozens of people who can do that. So again, that shifting kind of balance, I think, is a really important part.
That might explain as well that it might be now difficult to attract students for the Student Forum conference, because I think now it's all accelerated, right? I mean, people have to publish very quickly. I mean, there are even PhDs only on 3 pieces published, because, people really need to get 3 pieces published, when they finish their PhDs. And so I guess, there's this eagerness to go to the senior conference as quick as possible, to publish as quick as possible, to network to get a job. And I think, the field has shrunk. There are not so many, positions out there. I mean, European studies generally has been kind of, shrinking, and that makes it tougher for everyone, I think, right?
And that's interesting. We've been talking about PhDs, but we've also got early career researchers, which have become a much bigger part of what we had. And I see a lot of colleagues who have their PhD, but then it's a succession of 1-year posts, and they're kind of travelling around the continent, and very much more insecure kind of position. How do you see the forum doing things for them?
Well, we've only recently decided that we do invite early career researchers along as well, because we thought that might be beneficial for both the PhD students attending and for the early career researchers to still be involved in the student forum, still get a bit of extra training if they think they would like that. But I think PhD students can take quite a lot out of actually having early career researchers there as well, have extra support, make the student forum more attractive for PhD students, that you say, well, we've got people that got their doctorate that can give you really good advice that you can talk to.
But I think it goes beyond the opportunistic in that it's good for perhaps first-year PhD students. They come to the conference, the student forum conference, and they just present a paper. The second year, perhaps they organize a panel. The third year, they can also still come back and be discussant. It's all of these different skills about conference. It's not just about presenting. So I think even then, the early career researcher can again bring something else in terms of professional development, or just building networks, because perhaps they have to start writing grants and they need other collaborators. So we can do more in these conferences for different stages.
It's interesting, because one of the things I've always found about UACES is that the main association is always very welcoming and engaged with PhD students, with early career researchers, and certainly at the time that I was doing my PhD, I was more peripherally involved with other associations, and there it was very much the PhD students shouldn't, sully the purity of the main activities, and requirements about having limits on the number of PhD students at a panel at the main conference. You see that less, but do you see that as an advantage for the student forum, that the main association was already very open and supportive, or was it? How has that played out for you?
I think it was a natural process at the end of the day, because, for PhDs, the most difficult thing is to get into a panel, an organized panel, right? At the beginning when you do your PhD, you just send your abstract, and you think, well, someone will maybe pick me, without knowing that, in most conferences, conference organizers, they just take, panels that have been already organized, and so it's much easier. And so I think that process makes it difficult for PhD students to go to the senior conference, and therefore, I think the student forum would be. But maybe, as I said, now everything is accelerated, so perhaps even first year PhD students, they know already that they need to go with other people in a panel to submit, and that's why they prefer to go to the senior conference. But it should be a natural process, right? It should be harder for PhDs to get in. The senior one, that's why, the student one is there, right?
But I think something we haven't mentioned yet is resources, because the student forum is special in that there's support, financial support for students to attend.
That's true.
And not everyone has a very big amount of money while doing their PhD, and actually having that financial support helps bring perhaps people in and then really prepare them for that when they go to that expensive conference, they get more out of it.
And talking about the financial support, we've also got some other streams of money for doing some study trips. When that wasn't from us setting it up, so where did that come from?
I think the scholarships for conducting fieldwork abroad were in existence when I was in the student forum as a member, and I think I actually benefited from receiving one, quite apart from the financial support to actually go and conduct fieldwork in Brussels. One of the things that struck me was that it encourages PhD students to get into the habit of bidding of competing for funding, which has become even more important ever since, rather than expecting it to be handed out, essentially. And the whole process of making a case for your research, making a case for why this needs funding, has just got more and more important. So that practice, a kind of training of the broader academic skills, and it's not just academic skills either. One thing that we didn't talk about yet was transitioning from a PhD to a job outside academia, and that was a theme when I was doing my PhD, and I think it's taken on a sort of different life now in my work at the University of Hull. I lead on postgraduate research, and it's something that I talk about to PhD students as well. I don't know, does everyone else feel as though the PhD was training for and only for an academic job, or is there a sense that there are other careers possible?
You're shocked at the concept.
Sorry.
Of why you want to be an academic.
No, I think on this, I remember, so when we organised a session at one of the seminar on how to get a job after the PhD, and that was one of the key input. We needed someone who had done a PhD in political science and European studies and then gone on to a terrific job outside of academia, because more and more of us leave academia after the PhD. There's not that many jobs in the academia, and also there's lots of great jobs outside. So having kind of a positive discussion about this, it's not just because you can't find a job in academia, it's also because you might want to do something else. There's lots of great other things to do. So that was something that I was hearing in the student forum, but not necessarily hearing in my university. So I think the student forum here led the way as well in terms of having this open discussion about the fact that you can do something else with a PhD.
Yeah, I mean, going back to the question of whether PhD's training, the process leads to, or really people get trained properly for outside academia jobs. I don't think that it is the case. I mean, right now still I think PhDs are taught in a way that will lead you to academia, instead of really giving perhaps you other skills for other sectors. That's my impression. So there I think, because it's true that I see it that more and more fields you need to have now a PhD. I mean, in banking and finance, I think a lot of areas you need to now, but what wasn't before the masters, now it's a PhD, right? I mean, you have even like DBAs, right? Doctorate in Business Administration. So I think that's a trend, but I think in universities people still are trained to be an academic.
Yeah, I think that's where we're sort of responding rather than driving things in academia. I mean, the research councils in the UK, they're all over this notion that a PhD might lead to other careers, economically significant careers, socially significant careers, as well as careers inside academia. So I don't know whether that's... And, the way doctoral training is organised and funded by research councils in the UK has changed massively since I was doing my PhD and since I was in the student forum. And whereas we were organising events on elements of research training ourselves, then I think this is now increasingly really concentrated in doctoral training centres, the ESRC, doctoral training centres in our discipline.
And that has totally changed from my time. That when I was doing a PhD study, it was just me. I turned up at LSE and said, "Would somebody supervise me?" And somebody supervised me, and largely I was left to get on with it. And at the end we kind of hoped that there would be a PhD. So it is a very different kind of situation. I guess that prompts a question of a different kind, which is, how do you see the discipline changing? European studies is a broad area. So, how much is, about specific disciplines? How much is about the cross-cutting thing? Because one of the things I found really useful of the student forum of UACES was that opportunity to meet people from outside of whatever discipline I might be doing, and get that cross-fertilization of ideas. So, I see nodding heads. Is that?
One of the things we've been struggling with the definition of European studies is that on paper it is incredibly diverse. But if you look at who's coming to conferences, it tends to be political science, international relations, and there's a few lawyers who really still try to come and make it more diverse. But I think the diversity of European studies has been decreasing because of lack of perhaps language skills in students, and so there's been less and less specific European studies programs that were really looking at different disciplines. So that might just be coming up again now. I'm not exactly sure where it's going with Brexit and with the fact that Europe is in the news again a lot. We might actually see a new wave of European studies module and programs. But I think we need to be careful that this multidisciplinarity of European studies is something we need to fight for. We need to really encourage our colleagues in history, in law, to consider UACES, to come and contribute, and so that we're not just political scientists talking to each other.
I had conversations with people trying to convince them to submit an abstract to our student forum conference, and they were, well, I'm not European Union studies. You kind of are. Look at what you're doing and look at what I'm doing. I'm not strictly European Union studies in that sense. So you can't actually submit one. So, oh, right, it's that broad. I didn't know that. So maybe it's a matter of getting the word out there as well. It's like, you are invited. We are a broader field than it might look like from the outside.
Well, I think European studies generally, I think now it's inserted and more global. I mean, as I see it, more masters and, kind of broader postgraduate courses are really more about IR. I mean, I think students, I don't know, maybe in the UK with Brexit, and that might change, but I think at least, Madrid, my university, people really want, because now it's a very international university, you have people from all around the world, and a lot of these people, Japanese, Chinese, from the Arab world, they are not really interested in European affairs that much. And so I see the trend that, European affairs is just one aspect of the broader IR studies.
Which prompts the question, what about the future? And we've been looking back a bit over the past nearly 20 years of the Student Forum. Where do we go? What do we see as the challenges that we need to think about, the things that you think are going to be important? Anna?
I guess in the UK context, I'm at a UK university, we are, but what if there's no funding for EU-related PhDs anymore, which would be quite tricky for the UACES Student Forum, because a lot of the people that come to us are British students, and how we're going to work around that, which is a bit of a worry, which I don't think will happen straight away, because I think there'll be a lot of research now around Brexit. It's going to be dominating the next few conferences, but after that, if the money dries up, there's not everybody is as smart as me and does a PhD without funding. So if there's no money for it, we might maybe run out of PhD students for it.
Okay, that's true. Let's find someone who's more cheery or optimistic or sees potential.
I'm optimistic for the future. I think, the driving forces behind the UAC Student Forum that we've talked about back in the early 2000s, I think a lot of them are still there, maybe in a slightly amended fashion. It's the need to be able to interact with other networks. It's a dreadful term, but I think research is increasingly becoming collaborative rather than the lone scholar with their books kind of shut away. So being able to kind of connect with people from different institutions, from different countries, from different disciplines, that's something that I think the Student Forum has a really valuable role to play in. And I think, because it tends to be populated by youngsters on the whole, they're better able to think more radically and to be responsive to things that their members want.
And I guess UACES is quite international. I think there's about half of the association which is based in non-UK universities. So I think if we keep on pushing as well for that international aspect in a student forum, even if there's a slight dip or even a flurry of Brexit-specific PhDs at first, we'll still have the non-UK based scholars to balance it out and make sure we keep on talking about a variety of topics and in great places.
It is one of those paradoxes of the subject that often the things that bring people to the subject is problems. And, in that perspective, you might argue that this is a great time for European studies because there are a lot of problems, whether that's around the Eurozone, migrant crisis, neighbourhood relations, Brexit, very obviously. And again, it is that kind of question about what the subject changes, and I think one of the things that we see is that people are interested at the moment in particular things, but also that kind of generates a broader thing. And one of the things that for me always about the forum was you got to meet people who are doing different things and make you think about the broader context that was coming through. Anyone got any kind of closing thoughts? I think we all agree that the forum has been good for us, and I know that if I hadn't been involved in the student forum at the beginning, I wouldn't be doing something like I'm doing now as one of the officers of the association.
You started talking about how isolated you felt during your PhD, and that was at a political science institution. I did my PhD in an environmental science institution. And there were not many people doing social science, and the number of people doing politics or European studies were even smaller. So I think for lots of PhD students now, there's perhaps 1 or 2 persons in your whole university that do things on Europe. And so the student forum is even more needed now, I think, than it was then. And it's also really fun.
Agreed.
Thank you to all of you for your thoughts, your reminiscences, and your contributions. And I think we see what the next years will bring. Lots of opportunities, and doubtless the occasional hurried meeting with people to work out what on earth we should do about the local disaster that's occurred, which I think has been a theme for everybody at various points. So thank you once again, and thank you for watching.